We can repeat it, but I believe we shouldn't repeat it. What does repeat mean? Repeat means entering Berlin, going through all of Europe. That would mean colossal sacrifices. No, victory is needed, but this time by a different method. We will simply wipe everyone off the face of the earth, without having our troops there. That's it. Enough.
And there will never again be any talk of the existence of the Polish state. We will not repeat the mistake of allowing the German state to exist. That's it. There is no gratitude. We've learned that. Enough. Wipe them out.
Every time it just gets wilder in the Russian studios, threats against Europe are getting louder and louder. I mean, the imagination is off the charts, seeing a nuclear mushroom cloud over Brussels, Paris or London. And this is not some crazy fantasy. Nope. It's actually what they're talking about in Moscow. Meanwhile, this so-called second strongest army in the world, or should I say the second strongest army in Ukraine, keeps rattling its weapons, while failing to even protect its own frontline regions. Ukraine hits back. And guess what? Suddenly, it's Ukraine that gets accused of being, wait for it, Nazi. Yep. Classic. New week, new Russian nonsense. I'm Sofia and this is Spin Snipers, where we tear apart Kremlin drama and serve up the brutal facts fast. Once again, the crazy Russians are at it, attacking Europe with words and trailing it up with threats of war. Now, the funny part, this TV takes don't exactly line up with the Kremlin's official messaging that, oh, they have no plans to attack anyone. I don't know about you, but here in Kiev we don't buy it, because let's be honest, they love doing the exact opposite. First, they were not planning to attack Ukraine. Turns out we provoked them. Then they accidentally broke an energy truce. I mean, it's always the same, lying shamelessly. Now, back to Europe. Apparently, the Russians got their feeling hurt over some news from Poland. Poland is planning to demand reparations from Russia for crimes committed while under the Soviet Iron Curtain. Just a reminder, after World War II and all the way until 1989, Warsaw was basically under Soviet control. They were cut off from their European home. And oh yeah, Stalin and Hitler literally decided to carve up this country in 1939. So Russian propagandists, shocked, outraged. Reparations, they say? And then they go one step further. Poland should thank them. Yeah, really.
Today we are witnessing, for example, statements by Poles who have suddenly decided to demand some kind of compensation for the alleged violence committed by the Soviet Union and Russia in recent times. They should be thanking us. If you look back and recall the beginning of the 19th century, when Poland was finally partitioned, they try to blame everything on us, the Poles do. Let them read history. It was Austria and Prussia who stood behind the partition of Poland and who indeed divided it together with Russia. Alexander I proposed autonomy for the Poles, unlike other territories that were simply divided up. And during the Second World War, even before the war, Poland had only about 70 kilometers of access to the Baltic Sea, and now it has 700. At whose expense? At our expense. And 600,000 Russian soldiers and officers were killed.
Not at our expense, but thanks to us.
Yes, thanks to us. And this is how they thank us now.
This is one of those cases where Russia somehow did not participate in the partition of Poland, but somehow still got the maximum benefit. Magic of history, according to Russian TV hosts. Apparently, the Polish are supposed to be grateful for having their country first kept up, then occupied, and then generously allowed to exist under Moscow's watchful eye. Austria and Prussia? Guilty. Russia? Oh, just standing nearby, accidentally signing a few treaties. Autonomy under Alexander I, a humanitarian gesture, of course, even through it ending in the usual way, crushing uprisings, repression and Russification. And the expansion of Poland's access to the Baltic? A gift. Yeah, because at first the USSR and Nazi Germany erased Poland off the map and then decided to compensate them for the losses using the other people's territories. And the final magic spell. If Soviet soldiers' bones are lying around somewhere, all claims are automatically cancelled, and Poland is in permanent gratitude mode. Meanwhile, the years pass, and Russia not changing a thing.
Why should we even enter into dialogue with them? Seriously, why fight with a "you'll only get yourself dirty, and in the end, no one will understand anything anyway"? They need to understand what we want, and that we will strike.
We will strike.
This has always happened throughout our history. Every time they think the bear can be teased, mocked, laughed at, then they get hit. Then for 100 years they breathe in and out, calm down, then decide that's it, it's possible again and again.
On the top of that, these clowns on Russian TV have gone as far as talking about a possible nuclear strike on Europe. Now, of course, we all know Russia loves nuclear weapons, mostly for scaring people. The goal? Simple: to shake Europe's support for Ukraine. Because right now, Europe is basically Kiev's main ally, sending both financial and military aid. And to stop that from happening, well, Moscow just tells these scary stories, hoping it will frighten you. Classic move.
It's no coincidence that our grandfathers and great-grandfathers, our fathers, built Russia's nuclear shield, the one of the Soviet Union. It will have to be used. By the way, Andrei Anatolievich is always against it, but I'm for it. I don't feel sorry for them.
Well, Europeans are acting the same way again, completely miscalculating everything. They are pursuing a policy aimed at leaving us with absolutely no choice, as we've repeatedly said. Of course, they are now trying to move things around negotiations, even though we understand that Zelensky doesn't actually need any agreements.
Now, notice this. Episode after episode, we keep analyzing and hearing Russia's threat in the West. 1 minute, nuclear strike. Next, erase capitals from the face of the earth. Then, march into German cities like it's a World War II. We're hearing this, right? But at the same time, they say it's not them preparing for war with Europe. No. According to Moscow, it's Europe that's about to attack them. Yeah, makes total sense.
When Europeans claim that they are preparing for a war in 2029, we ask ourselves, why 2029? Russia isn't planning to attack them.
Trump will leave.
First, Trump will leave, and second, they are preparing for the 2030 elections. They are not preparing for our challenges, but to present challenges to us. On one hand, there will be political pressure. What are these negotiations for? They openly declare to drag Russia into meaningless peace talks, to try to restore a pro-liberal infrastructure inside Russia, even if not in the same form, even if not with the same leaders, to solve certain economic problems, and to exert proportional propaganda influence from the Western centers already in place. That's one. On the other hand, to provoke certain disagreements between Russia and its allies, that's two. And third, to exert direct military pressure. That's what these forward positions are being prepared for. That's why Germany is being militarized. That's why this new Reich exists, which they openly talk about. That's why Poland is on the front line, and Ukraine, worn down, battered, devastated, in whatever form it survives, it's important for them to maintain it. That is the springboard from which they will exert this military pressure on Russia.
So what does all this mean? Basically, the Russians are twisting facts, making threats 100 times over, and then suddenly they go, wait, why is Europe rearming? Really? Let me remind you, though of course you probably already know this, before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, NATO countries in Europe barely spent 2% of their GDP on defense. Everything else went to the social programs, the economy, you name it. Makes sense, right? No one wanted war with Russia, but Russia came anyway. And the war in Ukraine is not just about territory or resources. Russia has plenty of both. In fact, it's the largest country in the world. So what's this really about? It's about something bigger. Autocracy versus democracy. Russian influence in the region versus freedom. And right now, my dear viewers, Ukraine's fate depends on all of us. Will Ukraine join the EU? will the European Union show enough strength to break Moscow's structural grip? Will democracy defeat dictatorship? Now, back to Russian manipulations. The very same Russians who are threatening Europe are suddenly accusing Europeans of wanting to go to war. And when it comes to nuclear weapons, they've already blamed Ukraine, claiming it would love to use them. Classic.
And we can see how the British press has been spun lately. Don't even think about activating the Zaporizhzhia NPP. You don't know what's going on there. It could lead to a nuclear disaster. And in parallel, there's Palantir, which is developing nuclear weapons. Let me tell you, the simplest scenario, the easiest. Take a drone and put on it, as we've often discussed here, dirty nuclear or tactical nuclear weapons that the same Britain would deliver to Ukraine. The flight distance is negligible, and when a strike hits one of the nuclear facilities on Russian territory, Europe will say, no, it just blew up on its own. Well, maybe there was some drone, but come on. And who are we supposed to appeal to? How are we supposed to respond? Does anyone doubt that if Zelensky had even the slightest opportunity to use biological, nuclear, or any other kind of weapon, he wouldn't even for a second consider it? No, of course not. We have to prepare for all scenarios, calculate absolutely every possibility.
Wait, you're yelling that you will strike with nuclear weapons and then blaming Ukraine for supposedly having the same intentions? Ukraine does not even have nuclear weapons. What are you even talking about? And you know what worries me more? That they're pointing their finger at Kiev, because from experience, whatever Russia accuses Kiev of, they probably do it themselves. And this has been going on since 2014. By the way, Russia's stance on Ukraine has not changed a bit. And get this, Solovyov actually brought up that fake attack on Putin's own residence, the ones Moscow staged themselves. And just to remind you, even Donald Trump, who's pretty friendly toward Putin, did not buy these fairy tales.
Do you think that a person who calls for and attempts a strike on the residence of our Supreme Commander-in-Chief, that we should respond with something like a slap over the Lviv governorate? That's not a response at all. That's just an ordinary military target that needs to be hit. The response is the destruction of Zelensky and a strike on the government quarter. I don't even understand why some people are coming to the Rada. Why does the Rada even exist as a building? And don't tell me it's nearby, it's not nearby. We'll rebuild after the war. We'll enter Kiev and we'll rebuild everything.
So basically, Russia has not given up on the idea of occupying Kiev or destroying Ukrainian cities. And that story about Putin's residence, apparently it's just being used to justify their brutal attacks on peaceful Ukrainian towns. Of course, they found new arguments too. Supposedly, they're invading Kursk, Belgorod, and so on. Like, really? Those cities are also sitting without power? Russia, let me get this straight. It's okay when Kiev is left in the dark and freezing at -20. But your own towns, suddenly, that's a problem? Come on.
Right now, Belgorod is being brutally hit. Strikes are being carried out on Bryansk. And why? Because once we didn't take Kharkiv, didn't take Chernihiv, even though we were practically surrounded, even though we showed goodwill and withdrew ourselves. Why? There should be no more goodwill. Let me repeat. I don't feel sorry for Kharkiv. I sympathize with Belgorod. Kharkiv must be wiped off the face of the earth. Announce to the people of Kharkiv that in a week their city will no longer exist. Pack your bags, that's it. And then, despite all the outcries, what will Ukrainians think of us? I care the least in the world about what Ukrainians think of us. I don't care at all. All the Ukrainians who could have thought well of us are already here.
If Russia had not invaded Ukraine, Kursk would not even know what it's like to have attacks on its own city. The Russian population should be living under the same conditions as Ukrainians. feeling the full consequences of war. Moscow only understands the language of strength, and trust me, that's been proven time and time again. And here is the kicker. While Russian TV is calling for destruction of Ukrainian cities, and at the same time they're claiming they care about the future of Ukrainian people. Yeah, how does that make sense for anyone with brain?
Because excess mortality in Ukraine is off the charts. In Russia, there's no increase in excess mortality. And when you analyze it per 100,000 population, the conclusion is clear. For Russia, this war is not critical in terms of losses. But for Ukraine, it's at an extremely critical level. But who cares whether Ukrainians survive or not, except Russians, who still see some of them, even the lost ones, as brothers. Although after the shelling of Belgorod and Bryansk, there are fewer and fewer of them.
Actually, it's nobody else but Russians themselves who are killing Ukrainians. If it were not for Russia, there would be no casualties at all. And if Russia really cares whether Ukrainians survive, well, here's the tough. They could just put down their weapons and go home. That's it. So simple, right? And of course, there is always that one propagandist claiming that Ukrainians are, wait for it, Russians. Yeah, really.
We should not prevent more and more people from coming over to our side. After all, they are our people. We know that. And if, for some time, they found themselves in captivity to foreign ideas or on the other side by their very nature, then we need to do everything possible to bring them back.
Let me tell you this, Ukrainians are not lost. Ukrainians are a separate nation with their own path, completely independent from Russia. And just to remind you, that's a right we actually have. So enough with the nonsense. We are not one people and we will never be. Now on to something else. Another topic getting a lot of attention in Russia. Peace talks. This time the rounds were moved from Abu Dhabi to Switzerland, and of course the Russians are furious. Why do we have to fly so far? They complain. Oh, and here is the kicker. They are also angry because war criminals cannot just fly straight over of all Europe. Yes, that's apparently a problem for them.
I don't like that in order to be at the negotiations. And it's clear we were forced to do this at the request of the Americans because they are conducting parallel talks there as a gesture of our goodwill. The Europeans, in my opinion, showed contempt for the Americans. And they showed their true attitude toward these negotiations when they forced our delegation to fly 8 hours to Geneva. That is, we had to take a detour through Italy just to get there. Notice, Meloni was not present at the Munich gathering. She wasn't there, and we flew precisely through Italy. What were these pathetic European beggars trying to show with this demonstrative behavior by refusing to let our plane through? What did they think they could do? Deal with our strike aviation and our attack drones the same way? They've completely lost their minds. Meanwhile, the third round of negotiations is being held. Why don't I like Geneva? Because Italy has ceased to be neutral. It lost that status by introducing sanctions against Russia, throwing away centuries of carefully built experience. And we will never forgive them for that, and never forget. And all Swiss business, with their watches, chocolate, and banks, can go to hell.
After the usual threats, Solovyov moved on to explaining Russia's position. Peace talks, sure, they needed, but the catch, peace is only on Moscow's terms. Excuse me, but there are other parties just wasting their times in these talks, only to end up back at that same point, that Russia is not ready to give anything. Classic.
Negotiations are happening, but who needs these negotiations? Russia does. Russia needs the demands to be met. And we said, if it can be done diplomatically, fine. If not, we'll resolve it militarily. Ukraine? What Ukraine? Apparently, Budanov wants peace quickly, while another part of the delegation does not. That's just fairy tales, complete nonsense. And Arakhamia, who's used to deceiving Russians, what is he even doing there?
And of course, Europe did not get left out of this circus. While the US, Ukraine and Russia are at the negotiation table, Moscow is just thrilled that Europe has not found a seat yet. By putting others down, they try to boost their own importance. And when they run out of arguments, they just move on to personal insults. Classic Kremlin move.
All the Europeans flew there just to sit outside the doors, trying to overhear what the Russians, Americans, and Ukrainians are talking about. This is what Europe has come to. Just a disgrace. Seriously, a disgrace. Sitting outside the doors, catching fragments of information. So after that, it's ridiculous to talk about Europe, its power, or Ursula von der Leyen, a gathering of cheap who were actually brought to power by Epstein and his lobby.
Russia's position is clear and consistent. The patterns have not changed. Europe is under the gun, and they don't want to see Ukraine as an independent country. And these so-called negotiations, apparently they're just stalling for time and trying to sweet-talk Trump. Classic strategy. That's it for today. While the Russian propaganda machine keeps running, we'll keep exposing their lies. I'm Sofia, and this was Spin Snipers. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and don't fall for their spin.